Welcome to the session today on engaging community service providers towards localization. Go to the next slide. So we do have simultaneous interpretation for this session. The session will be run fully in English, but if you would like to hear the interpretation into either French or Spanish, please click the interpretation icon, the small globe in the toolbar of your Zoom window, and then select either English, French, or Spanish. We also ask that you stay on mute if you're not speaking during the session. You will have an opportunity to speak in small breakout rooms later on in the session. Turn on your camera in the breakout rooms if you're able to, so we can feel like we're in a room together. And then if you have any questions about interpretation or other technology during the session, please feel free to send me a message in the chat and I'll do my best to help you out. Next slide. So now I'd like to introduce Gitau Mbure, Food Security Technical Advisor with IDEAL, who'll be moderating the session today. So Gitau, over to you.
Thanks, Julia, and hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us for this collaborative session on engaging community service providers, CSPs, towards localization. So yes, Julia mentioned my name is Gitau Mbure, and I'm the Food Security Technical Advisor on IDEAL. I'm also very passionate about CSPs. I have seen the value that community service providers provide on food security programs over the years. And so I think it's really exciting that we get to talk about this. Next slide, please. So just an overview of our session today. We have essentially three objectives for this session. One is we aim to share and discuss different strategies being used to engage and ensure that community service providers are sustainable. Secondly, we seek to assess how COVID-19 has influenced the way food security programs work with CSPs. And then our last objective is to map out emerging lessons and also emerging opportunities for learning in advancing the topic of engaging CSPs towards localization. So that's what we're hoping to achieve from the session and part of this process of learning about CSPs. This is a collaborative session, so our goal is to keep it as interactive as possible. The format of the meeting will include some Menti meetup polling, so hopefully you're familiar with that, and that will be a good way for us to get a sense of your perspectives on a number of issues. And then you'll spend most of your time in small group discussions where you'll engage more intimately with other participants based on the different sectors where the CSP model is being applied. Next slide, please. So before we go too far into the session, I think it's worth spending just a minute or two to get on the same page on the definition of the term community service provider. Now, CSPs are common in food security programs. They are ubiquitous across development programs. But what we see is that there's no universal definition of the term. At least from looking out there, you could not find this is the one definition of what a CSP is. Different programs may use different terminologies for the role. But for this session, we will use the working definition of a CSP as frontline extension agents who often work in a volunteer capacity to promote development interventions at the community level. Based on this definition, we can note three key features that are common across CSPs. One is that CSPs are community-based. They work directly with targeted communities and households at a very local level. Secondly, CSPs have their main role is to facilitate access, and this could be acting as liaisons between external stakeholders and the community, facilitating access to knowledge, to skills, to services and products. And then thirdly, we see that CSPs often work in a volunteer capacity. They are not employees of the program. And although they may represent the program, they volunteer for this role, and often they are appointed within their community to act as volunteers and be the liaison. So they play quite an important role. And in today's discussion, we will highlight examples of different kinds of CSPs that we are working with. Based on what we know, CSPs are quite common in the health area, in the nutrition and WASH area, often referred to as community health workers. We also know that CSPs are common in agriculture, and there's various variations of that. You can have lead farmers, you can have community animal health workers, you can also have marketing agents. CSPs are also quite common in savings groups, in VSLA or silk groups. You'll hear them referred to as silk agents or VSLA agents. So the CSP model is used across many sectors, and we are hoping to discuss this further and also see how the way we are working with CSPs is evolving during the COVID-19 pandemic. But for now, we'll use our Mentimeter polling function to get a sense of how you as participants are engaging with CSPs, and I will hand it over to Julia to set us up for the poll.
Great. Thanks, Gitau. So there are 3 different ways you can access the Mentimeter poll. I've just dropped a link in the chat. So if you click that link, it'll directly open into the Mentimeter browser. You can also scan the QR code on the screen with your phone, and it should open up the poll directly on your phone if you prefer to respond that way. Or you can go to menti.com and type in the code that's shown on screen. So whatever is easiest for you. And I see we already have some people responding to the poll. So I'll share the results on screen.
Great, so I see the results coming in. On the question of have you worked with community service providers, I see a majority of us have worked with community service providers, so that's good. A few people have not worked with CSPs, and that's fine. I think it's an interesting topic to learn about, nevertheless, and hopefully over time you'll engage with CSPs and find this valuable. But yeah, pretty good. Okay, maybe the next question. So yes, the next question is, what types of CSPs have you worked with? And you can just put the term that you've used in the CSPs that you've worked with. It could be marketing agents, it could be savings group agents, it could be community health workers. Okay, good. Yep, I see our word cloud is populating quite well. And there's quite a variety of terms used to describe community service providers. So I see women's groups, I see village agents, I see savings groups. So community-based trainers, that's quite interesting. And women's groups. So quite interesting that we see there can be CSPs for specific sectors, but they can also be CSPs who doing a combination of roles. They can just be general community-based trainers. But also interesting to note that a CSP is not necessarily just one individual. It could be a group of community volunteers that have come together to lead a specific activity, as in the case of women's groups. So quite interesting indeed. Okay, excellent. So yeah, the next question. Which CSPs are most sustainable? And by sustainable, we mean when you think of a food security program engaging CSPs during the project comes to an end, which types of CSPs do you find are most likely to continue providing services after the project ends? And we've given some options there of areas where CSPs are quite common. Okay, so it seems that savings groups, CSPs, are viewed as being quite sustainable. And then CSPs in health nutrition as well, and a reasonable number of CSPs in agriculture. And this is going to be an interesting point as we discuss, because sustainability could mean different things. Sustainability itself doesn't mean that the service providers continue providing services all by themselves. It could mean that they continue working with different stakeholders to provide that service. But interesting to see that the savings group CSPs are viewed to be quite sustainable, and community animal health workers and agriculture. And then there's others which we'll hopefully get to hear about as the meeting continues. Okay, so yeah, Julia, we can go back to the slides. Okay, next slide. All right, Julia. Okay, will you be presenting about the poll?
There's a poll on screen. We would like to see which breakout room you're interested in joining. So as you mentioned, we have the 4 different groups. So please respond to the poll on your screen to indicate which group you would like to join for the discussion later in the presentation. We'll give you just a few more seconds before we move on. All right. Great, you can continue responding to the poll. It should automatically close after you respond. So Gitau, we can go ahead and move on and let those who haven't responded yet continue.
Okay, well, hopefully everybody will find a group that they are interested in having more intimate conversations about CSPs in that particular sector. But before we go into breakout groups, I would like to frame the topic of today's session a little bit more. So this collaborative session falls under thematic area 3 of the learning event, which focuses on localization and collaboration between international humanitarian actors and local partners. So the conversation about CSPs that we'll have today will revolve around kind of these 3 elements. One, the aspect of localization is really important. We appreciate the role that CSPs can play in linking communities to external stakeholders. So we find that CSPs are as local as it gets. There's a conversation about empowering local partners, and that could be national partners. But with CSPs, we're even talking about empowering local partners, the people who are closest to the communities, to continue playing the role that they can play in supporting the communities and the households in their locality. Secondly, it's just using the lens of what's happening during COVID-19. We appreciate that a lot of programs have had to make adaptations during the COVID-19 pandemic to navigate restrictions. And for the most part, food security programs have ended up relying more on community-based service providers for continuity of programming, for continuity of training, for continuity of support to savings groups and that kind of thing. So we want to see what's been happening during COVID-19, what changes have we noted, and what challenges or what opportunities are emerging there. And then lastly, the issue of sustainability is quite critical to this conversation. As I pointed out earlier, the goal of working with CSPs is that we engage them during the implementation time of the project, but we really want to set them up so that they can continue being a liaison and continue facilitating that access to services, to products for their community once the project ends. And this is something that is quite important across all food security programs, something that's central to the theory of change of food security programs. Next slide, please. So I did want to share this sustainability framework. It comes from a study funded by the former Office of Food for Peace, now Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, where they looked, they did a post-project evaluation of a number of programs trying to understand what are the factors that influence sustainability. And for CSPs, what we can keep in mind is that this Fanta study emphasized 4 factors as being important for ensuring that CSPs continue to provide services after the project ends. And those factors are sustained resources. This is a second row from the bottom. It's sustained resources, sustained capacity, sustained motivation, and sustained linkages. So we know food security programs typically apply strategies such as using a fee for service model to sustain these 4 factors, or having community service providers work closely with government or with other programs. But as COVID-19 has unfolded, we've seen food security programs having to adapt the way they engage with CSPs. So it'll be interesting to assess those adaptations and see how our approach towards sustainability is changing, and how also we are starting to adapt our exit strategies in working with CSPs. Next slide, please. So during the breakout group discussion that's coming up, you will have an opportunity to go over the questions displayed here. I won't go through them all, but they will guide you to kind of look at the kind of CSPs that you're working with, see what's happening during COVID-19, and specifically look at, how are you having to adapt the sustainability measures that you've put in place in engaging with CSPs. So we have 3 groups that are very sector specific. We have the community health workers group that's looking at nutrition, wash area. We have another group that's looking at agriculture, and that could be on the livestock side or the marketing side. We have another group that's looking at savings groups, and then we have another group that's looking at other sectors. And the group that will be looking at other sectors will have a slightly different twist to these questions, starting by looking at what specific area are we talking about, CSPs being the CSP model being applied. And as we pointed out, CSPs are not necessarily just individuals. CSPs could also be community committees or groups that are playing the same role of facilitating access for the community and being a liaison with external stakeholders. Next slide, please. So what can we expect to come out of this collaborative session? So there's two parts to it. One, today we'll be able to share observations and perspectives on impact of COVID-19 on CSP engagement strategies. We'll also be able to capture some of those emerging trends, some of the lessons that are emerging from the adaptations that programs are having to make. And then after today's meeting, our hope is that we can analyze the challenges, look at the capacity gaps that are emerging, and identify opportunities for further learning around this topic. And then in future, we do hope to follow up in advancing peer-to-peer collaborative learning around engagement of CSPs, and we'll design different modalities for that in future. But the conversation today will be really important in laying the foundation for the work that we can do around this area in future. Next slide, please. So I am very excited to be introducing our breakout group facilitators. We have a very illustrious lineup of facilitators. They're coming from different backgrounds, but they are all experienced and are quite knowledgeable about working with CSPs. So I'm hoping that you can enjoy the conversations that they will be leading. But I'll go ahead and introduce them. Our lineup includes Telesphore Kabore, who is a senior advisor for community health with the Breakthrough Action based at Save the Children office in Washington, D.C. And Telesphore will be facilitating the discussion on CSPs in health and nutrition and WASH area. We're also glad to be joined by Astha Thapa, who is a director of programs at DevWorks International, formerly SNV USA. Astha is based in Washington, D.C., and she will be facilitating the conversation on CSPs in agriculture. We also have Rita Larok, who is the Chief of Party for Graduating to Resilience activity, which is implemented by AVSI and their partners in Uganda. Rita will be facilitating the conversation on CSPs in savings groups. We also have Alex Bekunda, who is the COP for Noble Jatra program implemented by World Vision in Bangladesh. And Alex will be working closely with Saeqah Kabir, who is the Director of Knowledge Management and Communications, also on the Noble Jatra program. And Alex and Saeqah will be facilitating the breakout group discussion, looking at CSPs in other sectors. And each facilitator will be working hand in hand with a note taker, with a rapporteur who will capture key points from the discussion. And we really appreciate that function as well. It will help us document the proceedings from today, which will lay the foundation for further learning in this area. So I'll now hand it over to Julia to give us instructions for going into the breakout groups.
Thanks, Gitau. So in a moment, you'll be automatically sent into the breakout room that you selected from the poll earlier. If you did not have a chance to respond to the poll, we ask that you please type the group number of the room that you'd like to join in the chat now, so I can get you assigned to the correct room. Once you're in the room, a facilitator will be there to lead you through the discussion on the guiding questions that Gitau just shared. If at any time you need help or you end up not in the wrong breakout room, just click the Leave Room button on your Zoom screen and it'll bring you back to the main room and we can get you reassigned. There's also a button in the breakout room that you can click if you need any help at all. So I will assign you all to the rooms now, and we'll see you back here in about 35 minutes. Enjoy the discussions.
Welcome back, everyone. Yeah, I'll give it just a few seconds. It seems like people are streaming in. Wonderful. So yeah, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an enjoyable interaction and a fruitful conversation. We ended up with 3 groups. It turns out that those delineations of CSPs in either health, in agriculture, and in savings groups are pretty strong. Not as many folks working with CSPs in other sectors, but I think there's a lot to learn even in those 3 sectors. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the highlights that came out of the conversations that you had in each of the groups. So if you're ready, we will ask group 1, which was looking at CSPs in health, to share some of the highlights that came from your discussion. Group 1.
Hi, hello everybody. So in our group 1, Telesphore, it was very fantastic to facilitate the sessions, and it was very interactive. The key points we have identified here, that mostly we see that community health volunteers and multipurpose health volunteers, we have identified them as local service providers and the community service as a community service providers. So also the local service providers, they are selling water just they're just taking water from the reverse osmosis plants and selling those to door to door. So there's a varied range of activities we found from the community service providers. We also have found that peat latrine manufacturer, they also played a role as CSP. We see that Gold Star members, they are just selling health and hygiene products door to door, and they are just developing awareness of the people on COVID-19. We found that water user associations, they have also played role as community service providers. Health committees, water point management committees, they also played role as community service providers. Interestingly, we have found that during COVID-19, the LSPs really, they have some kind of innovation. Like previously, people visited reverse osmosis and collected water. But during the COVID-19, the local service providers, by the rickshaw van, they are just carrying water door to door. So this neat sort of innovation we see during COVID-19. Village health team, they have remotely communicated using digital medium, digital telecommunications and digital tools for nutrition screening and referral mechanism. We have found that there are training of small group mothers. So these small groups mothers are now capable to screen their children's MOAC status. So and Gold Star members, they are also in the COVID-19 situation adapted, they changed their strategies and now visiting door to door to sell the hygiene products and raising awareness on COVID-19. The pandemic basically really created delays in many cases. For example, community health volunteers, communicating them remotely, it has become a challenge. So continuity and sustainability is a factor here. Then previously we had a range of capacity strengthening activities that was happening face to face, but right now those face-to-face events cannot take place. So either we are going for virtual options, and virtual option is not always viable. So this is a sustainability issue. And for local service providers, coordination and sharing event are severely hampered. The major learning we see that hand washing practice has significantly increased because of the COVID-19 situations, and which has eventually increased the demand of hygiene products. So the village, the community people, the households, they are more and more interested to buy the hygiene products, collect hygiene products from different sources. Then there is a significant, we are now embracing technologies. There is improved digital technologies are being applied for the vulnerable communities in many different country contexts. context. So that is a good learning, and it's improving day by day. Community mothers' capability has increased for performing different tasks. For example, those MOAC measurements. Actually, right now, we see that we need mechanism to reach household level. So right now, for sustainability, for more programmatic intervention, we have to come up with more innovative ideas to reach household level. It is really possible to adapt in such context. And we are confident from different country contexts, from different country programs, development programs, that it's possible to adapt with the changing context under this COVID-19 situations, besides other disasters as well. And finally, we need some forward thinking that how could we design much more overarching resilient development programs. Then community could be engaged through media, radio, or maybe more innovative technologies could be applied to engage community in this programmatic context. And then graduation to resilience basically needs to continually examine the context, continuous examination and context, understanding the challenges, and then adapting as per the situation is required. And so we need the different stakeholders, implementing partners, donors, and all the stakeholders need to have a certain range of flexibility to adapt changes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rubaiyat. That was quite rich. And yes, I think the CSPs in health have had to do a lot of innovating. So very glad to hear the outputs from your conversation. So we'll move on to group 2, which I believe was looking at CSPs in agriculture. Let's try to keep our share outs to about 3 minutes or so, just key takeaways. And if you can, speak at a comfortable enough pace for our interpreters to be able to keep up with you. So over to group 2.
Hi, this is Dan. Dan Norell. I was in group 2. So the first question is, what kinds of community service providers are you engaging with? And some of our group members, the Food Security Project in Uganda, is working with savings groups, as well as with the private sector. The Ensure Food Security Project in Zimbabwe was working with market facilitators, particularly in terms of marketing. Key sustainability strategy for both projects. The Nobajatra or a Fresh Start project in Bangladesh, especially with COVID, the youth are often the aggregators at the farm gate for both input supplies for agricultural commodities, as well as production aggregation. And looking at different forms, certainly in terms of community-based, but also private-based or private sector-based, and real focus on private sector-based in our group. The input agents are really the ones who can reach farmers in a really remote area. And the village agents often focus in Bangladesh on promoting health and nutrition, selling nutritional products, and facilitate sessions within the communities around behavior change. On the second question, what are we observing when it comes to how CSPs, how we engage CSPs? One of the thrusts in our group was that people really need a source of income for the community service providers. Being long-term volunteer just doesn't work for most people, and really need a kind of incentive to create sustainability. Now, that might be social capital, but financial capital is just so key for households. We talked about digitalizing the system, especially in Uganda. Realization that the context assessment that over 90% had access to internet connection in some way. In Bangladesh, the COVID is much more difficult to market products door-to-door aggregation and inputs was quite difficult, although the community service providers were able to do it much better than traditional methods. CSPs have become more important during COVID, again, to go door to door. Also looking at the community CSPs are the ones to facilitate community level change, such as hand washing. Excuse me, scroll down, thank you. Also, the question is, how has the pandemic affected the measures we have put in place to ensure sustainability of the CSP model in our programs? A lot of CSPs are leaders in their community. They are also then village agents, often both for VSLAs as well as for agriculture. The constraint on leadership and communities, there's often limitation, and often it all goes to one person. Diversifying leadership is important. Often leaders are often politically connected with sometimes negative impacts of even threats of violence in community members. There's limited opportunities for CSPs, and the challenge of capacity building and training long-term in the field. Some programming works on CSPs able to sustain themselves financially. Some of the revenues have been affected with COVID-19, so the challenge for income for them. Also a challenge of accessing government funds, because that's often for legally registered companies. And so a challenge of that, the agent to agent model of having more efficiency and working on that, particularly in Uganda. The CSP is linked to private sector engagement or linked to government sector. The key for that for long-term sustainability is stressed by a couple of speakers, especially in Niger, but elsewhere, is technical training is done by seed providers instead of the NGOs. So the technical training was done by the private sector, who then would have the CSPs be their agents long-term. Also looking at permanent place structures within the government and private sector, even registration of community service providers by the government. Be aware of the motivation of the private sector. So that was in our group.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dan. We are running short on time, so I'll hand it over to group 3. Savings groups.
Yes, thank you. Robina will just be sharing. I think most of the things we talked about have been discussed. So very quick highlights. Robina?
Yes, thank you, Rita. So quick highlights, really. In terms of the providers within the savings groups, the VHTs remain key. What else came up was the Gold Star members who deal directly with private sector, a case of Kenya. Multipurpose health volunteers, really those that do a lot of multipurpose work. And then the digital champions who deal with digitalizing of VSLS, and these are private sector led. And the rest are similar structures. In terms of what we are observing when it comes to how we used to engage the providers versus now, we see switch to remote engagements versus physical engagement pre-COVID, and then transition from previous work to health, nutrition, and COVID messaging integration rather than sticking on the routine work. And engagements of education levels. And in this, we've observed great adaptations other than before, where we used to be a bit picky about education levels. This has disproved us. Provision of mental health or COVID-19 messaging other than just regular work, increase or additional investments in the cost of virtual engagements, having to provide airtime, having to provide internet bundles, and then reduced frequency of meetings, prompting a switch to use of apps to monitor performance of VSLAs. Please scroll down. In terms of how the pandemic has affected the measures and how it's affecting sustainability, we see increased cost of engagements to the fact that we need to deal with smaller groups, and also having to engage in remote monitoring, investing in those technologies. That's prompting increased cost of engagements. And then increase private sector engagements to meet a lot of technology demands. Adaptations have come along with technology needs. So increase private sector engagement. And then remote engagements affecting evidence-based monitoring. We see less physical engagements to validate certain monitoring initiatives. And finally, in this regard, reduce transparency in saving groups, and this is affecting trust, cohesion, and hence affecting sustainability, since they do not have to meet and observe the different engagements happening. And in terms of the last questions, which is looking at the lessons that are emerging, which opportunities we are seeing, we see a lot to do with leveraging on digital platforms for concealed, leveraging on private sector partnerships for supply of commodities, but also knowledge and products, given the availability on ground that they have exhibited amidst COVID. Digital literacy training in programming at all levels. We see a need to program digital literacy really in mind. And then a strengthening of communities and has been underestimated. We've seen that the communities have come out to have a lot of ideas amidst COVID-19. And so we need to harness this strength. Please scroll down. And finally, in terms of the major takeaways, we see similar experiences across board. The experiences that have been shared across different countries are similar, and so we deem this adaptation applicable irrespective of locations. And then we see a need for all stakeholders to be taken care of mentally. We see that the people that have been affected by COVID are not only those participants at receiving end, but also the skillers and those that provide skills. So we see the need to for mental health for all stakeholders. Thank you so much. That was it for group 2. Over.
Thank you so much, Robina. And thank you so much to all the groups for the participants. It seems like it was a very lively discussion, very productive. So you've given us a lot. And as I said, this is just the beginning of a learning journey on how we are engaging with CSPs, how that's changing during COVID-19, and how we continue to strengthen sustainability and move towards localization. So thank you so much to the participants and to the facilitators of the breakout group discussions and the note takers for doing such an excellent job. As we come to the end of the session, I would just like to ask you as participants to take a few minutes to complete the session evaluation. I believe Julia will drop a link for that in the chat box. We value your feedback for this session and for continuing to improve this kind of collaborative peer-to-peer learning. So please, if you can take a few minutes to complete that evaluation, we will really appreciate. Just one more thing, we want to continue this conversation. So if you're interested in being part of a working group, our forum that continues to look at evolution of community service providers, there's a place in the evaluation, the session evaluation, where you can give us your email, and then we'll be in touch with you. And then lastly, we will compile notes from this session and analyze those notes, put out a synopsis that kind of gives some recommendations on opportunities, learning opportunities, and also activities that we are going to pursue in future to continue advancing learning for this particular area. So I think that's it from me. Thank you so much for joining our session, and please continue to stay engaged with Ideal. We have other sessions today and tomorrow, so hopefully you'll find other sessions to be of interest to you, and you can join us as we continue this journey. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.
Thanks, Gitau.